Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti. Innanzitutto mi permetto di dire due parole in italiano, poi passo all'inglese, ma il professor Falomir Faus parla benissimo italiano e lo so per aver lavorato con lui intensamente, ormai quanti sono? 3 anni fa, eravamo in una commissione per nominare 13 direttori dei musei italiani e quindi abbiamo lavorato gomito a gomito per mesi, valutando i titoli e facendo gli orali. Però adesso prima di passare all'inglese lo voglio davvero ringraziare di essere qui, di averci fatto questo bellissimo regalo, di venire al Museo Egizio e di essere in dialogo con noi. Come sapete questo è il nostro quarto incontro ed è un percorso per noi di preparazione verso la celebrazione del bicentenario. Abbiamo deciso di non farlo da solo, ma di chiederlo ai colleghi delle più grandi istituzioni europee di parlarci di cosa sia un museo e di quale futuro possa avere un museo. So now I switch to English. Thank you again for being here. You are the 4th guest in this series. We had the director of the Vatican Museum, we have the director general of museum, Professor Osanna, we had Professor Patzinger last month, and now we are very glad to welcome you here. In this path towards the bicentenary, is for us important to be in dialogue with colleagues from other important institutions to asking ourselves, what are we? What kind of institution are we? Are we a place of destruction? Are we a place of conservation? Do we have a future? And how does this future look like? So the first question that I would like to ask the director of one of the most important museums in the world is, what is for you a museum?
Well, First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm very pleased, and this is a wonderful museum. And well, you know, as you know, we celebrated our bicentennial in 2019. So I know that you have a lot of work ahead. So good luck. And if we can, you know, be of some help, you know, we will be happy to collaborate with you.
I will ask you as a last thing at the end of our conversation about your bicentenary, and if you can give us some insights or behind the scene, what was finished, what was not, etc.
Okay, I'll do. Okay, going back to your question, what is a museum? It's not an easy question, and it's true that I run a museum, an important museum, but I am not a museum theorist. So I know what a museum is, but I have never thought about it, and I have not never written down, you know, my thoughts about what a museum should be. So I have to say that I feel quite comfortable with the current definition given by ICOM, no, about what a museum is. I allow myself to bring it, and or if you take it as a definition that it has been given to what a museum is in a certain moment. So I think it's important to keep in mind that museums are ever changing and transforming institutions. So I think that it's an acceptable definition of what a museum is in the 2020. And I'm sure that it will change in the coming years. And then you have to accept that it is a compromise solution between different and sometimes opposite sensibilities about what a museum is. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not the first definition of museum provided by ICOM, and it's not going to be the last. I have included some of the previous ones, and when you check the differences between them, you realize that the essence of the definition remains this idea that we have always had in mind that what is a museum. It's an institution that is not for profit, that is open to the public, that it takes care of a permanent collection, that does research on that collection, that display it in a proper way. And then you can see how that's what the 1974 definition says, and I think that this could have been written 100 years before. And that's how the museums were, barely 50 years ago, and how they have changed. And you can see how the museums are becoming more and more relevant in our societies. And as a result of that, we are including other functions, and we are emphasizing this role within the society. We understand museums as open institutions that have to be engaged with the society in a more varied and more, multicultural society. So I think that this is a good example that tells you many things about things have changed in the last years. I'm 57, so I am old, but not terribly old. I joined the museum world 26 years ago, and I have witnessed how the museum has changed since 1997. No, it's something quite different, and I am absolutely sure that in the coming years, in future definitions of museum, this social dimension of the museum will expand in the definition, in the recognition that what a museum is. No?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I would like to stay on this because I also know that it's something very important for you and for your policy of the museum. So museums foster diversity and sustainability. They operate and communicate ethically, professionally, and with the participation of communities. This is very interesting, and I think it's the core, as you were saying, that we're becoming more and more relevant. But I want to be a little bit provocative. When we, as you and we, all museums in the world had to close for COVID, and was also the moment when we were working together to appoint 30 new directors of museums in Italy while the museums were closed. So it was a really weird definition. It was also the reason why Miguel unfortunately couldn't come to Rome, because it was difficult to travel, so he had to be connected all the time from Madrid. And if we were reading at that time the Italian newspapers, I don't know whether it was the same in Spain, people would say, well, the museum are closed, there is travel limitations, the Americans, the foreigners are not coming. So is it sustainable to have museums? So the link that was made immediately in the press was the museums are there for mass tourism. If we don't have tourism, the museums are not sustainable. But why? Our definition is saying something completely different. We are here for the community. We are so. How do you think we can make it even more understood? I'm very willing to know what is the case of Prado. I can tell you that in Turin, for instance, in this museum, we suffer one disadvantage of being big, which is being big, which means we are seen by the community, not as being the museum of the community, we are seen as the place where people come from outside, foreigners come, or the place where you have to queue to get inside, even if it's not true, but that's what people think. And when we look at the percentage of people from Turin coming, is very low even compared to other museums. So how can we combine the fact that we become a hub of attraction for foreigners, for tourists, while we have this role, and we do believe that we have the role to function within the community?
Well, starting with the reference you have made to the COVID and the pandemic, I remember then that nobody truly considered, everybody accepted that museums were important, but not as important as other institutions. And culture was important in order to provide with TV movies to those who were trapped in their homes. Yeah. So that they couldn't complain. But then, I remember that I had meetings every 2 weeks with the Secretary of Culture. These meetings were attended by the directors of the leading museums and leading cultural institutions in Spain. And the Secretary of Culture said, well, since culture is not so important, we have decided that, the cultural institutions and museums should remain closed until the very last, stage of the pandemic. And we say, no, that's just the opposite. We think that are so important that we have to be the first open and be open to the public. And miraculously, we were able to convince him. And at the end, we were able to open we were closed just for 3 months. That was unbelievable. For a while, we were the only major city in Europe with the museums open. But then, some other problems arise. One of them was that everybody was very proud in Spain about the Prado. The year before, the museum has celebrated its bicentennial, and everything was great. But what nobody knew was that those who were paying for the museum were the foreign tourists. Our main source of income, up to 70% of our budget, were the tickets that foreigners paid. So once the museum closed, our main source of income collapsed. And that's when we had to tell the Spanish public opinions and the Spanish politicians, you have to pay for the museum. If this is a national museum that it's supposed to be the jewel of the crown of the Spanish cultural system, and the government were paying just for the 15% of our budget. So that's something that it has been positive, with the COVID, that at least we have been able to convince both politicians and the public opinion that they have to maintain the culture. So that's important. Then, the other positive aspect of the pandemic is that we could focus on the community. It's true that not in the real community, but in the virtual community. So instead of attending tourists coming from, the most distant places in the world, we began to produce, because even during the pandemic, the worst weeks of the pandemic, we were all the time producing new contents for our website. So we established a very close community with both Spaniards and mostly Spanish-speaking population, mostly in Latin America. So in that way, it was positive. But I fully understand what you were saying, how a museum that has 3.5 million visitors every year can, be part of the community where it is, no? And this is quite difficult. A museum like the Prado has like a triple identity. It's an international museum, it's a national museum, it's the most important cultural institution in Spain, but it's also a local museum. And again, like it happens here with the Museo Egipcio, barely the 16% of our visitors come from Madrid. So, but even so, they are quite important because they are the regular ones. They are the ones who, at the end, establish a closer relationship with the museum. They are the ones that mostly attended our activities, and they are the ones who have a better informed opinion about the museum, and they create the opinion, the public opinion about the museum. And yeah, how to deal with this triple nature, it's difficult, but I think that first, we are investing a lot in education. and we are trying to open the museum to all those who don't even consider the possibility of visiting a museum such as the Prado. In order to do so, we have to first invite them to visit us. We are trying to eliminate, obstacles, not just physical ones that we are doing, but also the economic ones. So right now I would say that there is no any financial reason for not visiting the Prado.
How do you do that?
Well, the Prado, I want to believe that he's very generous with his free gratuity policy. It's free every day from 6 to 8. And you have to keep in mind that the Prado opens daily. It only closes 3 days per year. So that means...
This is the only thing where we beat you.
Yeah.
We only close 1 day a year. Well, it's the only, we only close
and then besides that, these 2 daily hours of gratuity, if you are under 18, a student, under 26, if you are an employee, if you are a teacher or journalist, it's free at any time. So at the end of the year, half of our visitors don't pay at all. Plus 12-13% get any kind of discount. So at the end, barely at 37% of our visitors pay the full ticket. So I can say that, there is no financial excuses for not visiting the Prado. However, I suppose that you do more or less the same. Every 4 or 5 months, we do a survey of our publics. And we always find out that most of our visitors, local visitors, are from upper middle class. So at the end, you realize that the most important barriers for not visiting the Prado are not the economic ones, but are the education. I would also say that the mentality, this is the main problem we have. Many times when I have, I've been invited to talk with, communities where from the less developed neighborhoods in Madrid, and I was trying to convince them, that every day it's free, from 6 to 8. At the end, they confessed to me, that's not the main reason why I'm not visiting the Prado. The main reason is when we stand in front of the facade and we see the columns, we think this is not a place for us. That's to me, that's the main obstacle, and that's what we have to work mostly, and how to dismantle these barriers and mental barriers. And for that, you have to invest a lot in education, in social programs. You have to have very clear targets. These are the groups I want to work with. That means, people in risk, young population in risk of exclusion, those who have little means, that's the people from the rural areas and so on. And well, I have to say that it takes time, this is nothing that you can change in a year or 2 or 3, it takes decades. But I have, and I want to believe that we are starting to see some positive results.
We have exactly the same. In our survey shows that especially Italians coming, they have very high degree of education, university education at least, high school, almost all of them, university education, or even a PhD or something, those regular that comes to the museum, which really fits with the national survey that says that 26% of Italians go to a museum once a year, and normally is the higher Well, not economically, because also people can have a high education but not have reached that level of economic stability, but still, I completely agree with you, is the barrier, is the fact that the first step of a museum is seen as that is a place that's not belong to us. And that's why working with the communities is very important. While you were talking, I was thinking of the very nice book of Nina Simon, The Participatory Museum, where she has the facade of a museum and people are trying to go inside a museum and to conquer it.
Something about our visitors, and for instance, here you have, well, I have to say that we have rejuvenating our audience. Most of our visitors are under 40, but that's not true.
Excluding the schools.
Excluding the schools, but then mostly are tourists.
Okay, yes.
So when you focus on those who visit the museum at least twice per year, you realize that they are mostly over 45 or 50. Mostly women. I don't know how it's here. But
it is above 50 and women that normally, because I always say in this museum, so if you look at the data of the museum, they can trick you, because then our average is very low, because we have 300,000 students, which I call them the deported visitors, that they are forced to come, they have to come because schools bring them. But if you exclude that, all in a sudden, the average of our age is much higher. And it's normally women that bring their grandchildren to the museum.
And sometimes their husbands.
Yes, sometimes their husbands, if
but you could notice that they are quite reluctant about that. And and then if we focus in those who attend our activities, female could easily be the 80-something%. Sometimes it's embarrassing. it's embarrassing. And then here you can see, those who are, with lesser education are barely a 5% of our visitors, while, those who have, master degrees and university degrees at the end are over 70-80% of our regular visitors. So that's how it is, Yes. And it's difficult.
It starts already with schools, because we have recently launched a program. We had been financed last year for a very nice program to enhance education in the cities, especially in the outskirts of the city. Because if you look, already middle school and high schools that come here are normally schools of the center, of children that have parents with a high education, but people who live in poor neighborhoods is very difficult to come. So we have launched a program to go and pick them up. So the museum has buses, we go, because sometimes also transportation is difficult. Teachers do not want to travel with difficult classes in public transport. We have special programs for them, because I think it has to start also when they are young, because at that period, if they discover the museum, then they can find the museum back.
Yeah, we have exactly the very same program. We are the ones who take the bus, we pick them in their neighborhoods and bring to the museum. It's funny because the Prado is located in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Madrid and is surrounded by other extremely wealthy neighborhoods. So when we ask our regular visitors, how do you come to the museum? They say, walking. Walking distance, it's incredible. What is working for us, this is something, a new initiative that we have started this year, is that besides these 2 daily hours of gratuity, that at the end, it's full of tourists who could easily pay for the ticket, but they prefer not to pay, and the 15 euros of the ticket, they prefer to take a couple of beers. So we found out that most of the population with less economic means, they live far from the center of the city. So these 2 hours at the end of the day are useless for them. Instead of that, we began to open the museums on the first Saturday night of each month. Free for everybody, but there is when we began to realize that many immigrants, many who had never visited the museum, they were coming. It was a more informal kind of visit. We had music. It was something more relaxed. And this had, I think, somehow helped in order to dismantle these barriers. You know, it's working.
So, staying in this topic, but changing a bit, I remember it was more or less 1 year ago that we were drinking a coffee in your nice cafeteria, and I remember we were discussing together of the what is the role of the museum within Europe nowadays. So we talk a lot about decolonize the museum, having no more a Eurocentric view of the museum. I mean, in the literature, this is really a main topic of discussion. After I visited you last year, I went to a conference at the University of L'Aquila, and it was about decolonize the museum. And a colleague from the University of Amsterdam said, well, all of us here are not really looking at a huge elephant in the room. How can we decolonize a structure that is embedded in that culture? So the only way to decolonize a museum is to shut a museum. Of course, it's provocative, but what is your view and what are you doing to decolonize the museum and to make the narrative not anymore the unique narrative of a conquering Europe, but a narrative that can be appealing also to other communities?
Yeah, well, you are absolutely right. This is one of the hot topics, no, in our field, and it's true that many times we confuse decolonizing with restitution. Restitution might be a part of the decolonization process, but it's not the same. And at the end, what we have to discuss is if museums are, since its origin, colonialistic institutions. And we, Europeans, for many years, we were very proud to say that the museums were one of these very successful outcomes of the Enlightenment, no? That, you know, this pursuit of happiness, you know, these ideals of fraternity, of universal access to culture. But we sometimes forget, or we don't want to accept, that these ideals were intended only for white men, excluding all the others, including or starting with the female white population, no? And so, yeah, in some way, you know, our museums, the idea of the modern Western museum was born in this, you know, imperial context, and this is something that this dark side of the Enlightenment, we don't want to see it or accept it. Although, you know, I always, when I think about these things, I always bring to my mind how Goya brilliantly captures this idea in this print that I'm sure that all of you have in mind. That is its title is the monster of the reason. No, is the dream of the reason produces monsters. No, it's all about these, you know, these two sides of the Enlightenment, and yeah, no, it's something that we have to assume, and I think that I again closing the museums. I think that museums are important, maybe because you know, in my 50-somethings, I prefer reforms instead of revolutions, but we have to assume that we have, you know, this past, and we have to do many things in order to fix that situation. First of all, acknowledging this past, and how we are dealing with this situation. Well, we accepting this, that I think that it's true, I also believe that we have to be very careful that not every country is the same. Not all the imperial powers did the same. For instance, the Spanish imperialism, and Spain was one of the mega imperial powers in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. It was not bad or better or worse than the others, but it's quite different than the imperialism of the European countries in Africa in the 19th century. And the outcome of that imperialism was quite different. So, for instance, if we think when of course, the Spaniards arrived into America and they conquest, it was a violent conquest, and they looted and they took all the gold and silver pieces that they could and they brought to Spain. They last just a few decades due to the financial difficulties of the monarchy. All of these pieces were melted in 30 years. It's impressive when you read the inventories of Emperor Charles V, and there are, thousands and thousands of gold and silver objects from the Americas, and you read the inventories of his son Philip II, and all of them have disappeared. So in that sense, there are not pre-Columbian objects in Spain that should be restituted to the countries of origin. But when you check the inventories of Philip II, what you find there are paintings, sculptures, that they were commissioned by Spaniards who have settled in the Americas. And many of these objects arrived into Spain in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. Think, for instance, in the literally thousands of images of the Virgen de Guadalupe, the Guadalupe Madonna, that arrived into Spain. Still, there are thousands. It's unbelievable how many arrived into the country. They were extremely cheap. They were bought by these Spaniards who were there, first, second, third generation, and they sent back to Spain in order to spread the devotion to this Marian devotion. How do you qualify these objects? Are colonial objects? Are objects that have to be restituted? I know that it's hard to find the equivalent of these objects if we are talking about, Kenya in the 19th century, but that's when I try to say when, every situation is quite different. And many times in Europe, we accept all the new methodological, ideological trends coming from the Anglo-Saxon world without questioning them. And at least we have to make the intellectual effort to adjust to our societies and to our own history. So I think this is very complicated. But because for us, by far the most important aspect on this decolonization process is related with the Americas due to the obvious relationship that Spain has had and has right now with the Americas. And that's the other aspect that I find very interesting. Many of these objects that arrive into Spain, paintings and sculptures, were gifts that were given to the Spanish crown. They were displayed in the Spanish royal palaces, along works of art by Rubens, Titian, Raphael, Velázquez. As such, they arrived into the Prado when the Prado was founded. It was founded as a royal museum. The king decided to move most of his most valuable artistic treasures to the museum. And for a while, these objects were in the Prado, with these masterpieces from Western painting. But at the end of the 19th century, they decided that these objects didn't qualify as works of art, that they were very interesting, documents, historical documents, and they were sent to the Anthropological Museum first and then to the Museum of America. Well, that's where they are. They technically belong to the Prado, but they are in permanent deposit in the Museo de America. Right now, easily 20% of the population of Madrid are from Latin American origin. They are immigrants that have arrived into Spain in the last 20-25 years. Spain, like Italy, was a museum of immigrants, now it's a museum of, it was a country of immigrants, now it's a country of immigrants. Well, what message we are sending to this population when we tell them that the objects, the paintings, the sculptures that were done in their countries of origin cannot be displayed in the most important cultural institution in Spain, but should be displayed in a non-fine arts museum. So what we are trying to do is to recuperate these works of art. We are paying more and more attention to American art. We did our first exhibition devoted to works of art that arrived. It was focused on works of art that arrived into Spain from the early 16th to the late 18th century. The idea was we chose works of art from every region in Spain, and the message that we sent was no Spaniard lives farther than 10 kilometers from an American object, and nobody is aware of this. So I think that it was a strong message in order to say if these works of art have been living or have been in Spain for centuries, and they are part of our cultural heritage, as much as many times, those who live with these objects don't know that they are from an American origin. So if the objects could integrate into the Spanish society, the new immigrants can do the same. So that's probably the lining where we are working more. In a couple of years, we have an exhibition devoted to the Guadalupe. That is something that nobody can think in Spain about the Guadalupe. It's a very popular devotion, but nobody can consider it a work of art. So that's going to be important to show these images in the museum. And with the exhibition, what we did devoted to American objects was the first time that I saw, immigrants in the museum. And some of them were very proud to be there.
It's so nice. You said so many things that I agree with, and I want to come from this very last moment. We having immigrants or newcomers coming to the museum. I remember once I was welcoming two families of Egyptians here, and they came while we were having a program especially for them. And I remember that was very nice to welcome them. They came to a visit, so it was organized through somebody that knew them and brought them here. They had been living for 20 years in Milan, but they had never been to a museum. So first of all, it was wonderful because they didn't know how to dress up. So they dressed up like going out at night. And they had little children. The little children had ties, and because they were coming to a museum. And then I went to fetch them while there was a long queue to enter the museum. And one of the things that this Egyptian gentleman told me was, really, we are the last of society and Italians queue up to see our culture. And for me that was an eye-opener to see how the link for them of this culture is not only something scientific that you study in books, but it's something belonging to the country they come from. And while you were talking, I was discussing once with a colleague coming from Congo, who was very critical about restitutions, because there is also a huge debate about what was happening. And he said something like, it took us 200 years to enter European museums, and now you want to get rid of these objects. So it's always difficult to find a balance, and I do agree also that Europe, maybe I would say Catholic Europe, which doesn't mean it has nothing to do whether you believe or not, but the culture is Catholic Europe. Southern Europe should also find a way that is not necessarily the same way that Anglo-Saxon world is finding. And I think that Europeans haven't found the way to deal with decolonization of having a new model of museum. As you say, very often we just have pattern that arrives from overseas and we apply them, but without being critical enough and without adapting them in a social structure which is different from country to country, which I think is something that we have to take into account. When you were talking about...
So, yes, these are some of the works of art that belong to the Prado, but that are in permanent deposit in the Museo of America. The one at your left is right now probably the most requested painting in our collections. Is this triple portrait of these three mulattos de Esmeralda. These were mulattoes who, from a tribe in Ecuador, and for many years they were in war with the Spanish authorities. At the end they signed an agreement, and with that occasion the chief of the tribe and his two sons were portrayed by a painter, and the painting was sent to the king. So this painting was displayed in the Royal Palace of the Buen Retiro next to works by Velázquez and many others, and along portraits of other mandatories in the world, other leaders in the world. While the other are these very exotic, mother of pearl paintings, that it's a mixed technique brought from Asia through the galleon of Manila that arrived into the Philippines, were also part of the Spanish crown, and these techniques and materials arrive into the America, and these were intended as a gift to the King of Spain. They are unbelievable, high quality, extreme sophisticated works of art. In the Museum of America, they are displayed just in order to tell the conquest of Mexico. They don't care about the materiality of these works. They don't care about their aesthetic values. It's all about telling you that how Cortés arrived into the Mexican shores and how he met Moctezuma and so on. So it's truly a pity. And this is some images of the exhibition that we did focus on the works that arrived into Spain during the colonial period.
And talking about having new kinds of public, I mean, you said more than 3 million visitors, so you have literally, of course, you're a museum of a community, as you said, you have a national museum.
We try to be.
But you're also a museum, you're one of the major attractions worldwide. How do you deal with communicating with people that have a different cultural background, that, for instance, are not so used to Christianity, to Christian symbolism, to make the collection accessible, to not anymore to keep it for granted? And I'm asking you that because in a museum like this, is something that we have to question all the time. I mean, Egyptian is something that you study maybe in the first 2 pages of your history book or the first year where you're in class, but then you're not used to this kind of iconography. So we try to find ways to help people to look, to help people to see, to interpret the symbolism that is not completely immediate. Do you do such a process of interpretation for Christian art, not giving it as a granted anymore, that people understand it?
Well, I remember that I have a colleague who is a Japanese scholar who is a specialist. He did his dissertation on Spanish 17th century painting. And I remember when I met first him 30 years ago, and we were visiting the Prado, and he was telling me, well, for you Spaniards, this is so easy to understand. This is all these religious paintings, but for us, we have not been educated as Christians or Catholics, so this is alien to our culture. Right now, I would say that Spaniards don't know anything about Catholicism either. Spain used to be one of the most Catholic countries in the world. Right now, barely 20% of the population attend church every week. So it's amazing how they don't know anything either. So, but yeah, what we began to realize like 15 years ago, it's not just specifically the religious content of the paintings, but also mythology or history. We have more visitors, but the average visitor is less educated than the previous ones. 60 years ago, we could have, 300,000 visitors, but all of them were of very high cultural level. The museums were for the elite, were not for the public. There were not education departments in the museums. The museums didn't do anything for welcoming, more visitors. But right now, we found out that they didn't know what they were looking at. So in these surveys that we do, we found that, and 15 years ago, we rewrote all the labels. Because in the past, the labels were focused mostly on aesthetic issues, history of art, and we realized that at least we had to include a first paragraph describing the subject and trying to explain the religious, the mythological subject, or the historical event that it was being represented there. I think that this is important, but I think that at the end what we have to do is when you have a collection like ours, that is mostly from the 15th to the late 19th century, you have to realize that, my main concern is how I make relevant this collection to the current public, how these paintings, depicting, the mythological tales or scenes from the Old Testament could be relevant to the new generations. It's not easy, but I have to tell you something. What I found is that they are telling stories. They have a narrative capacity that is amazing. And these objects are not dead. Even if they, depict acts and facts that happened years ago, when you look at these objects, you look at them with curiosity. And if you are able to present to the public in an attractive way, and if you are inviting through the labels to the public to pay attention to some aspects of the painting that he has not noticed, and I think that you can do many things, because this is narrative art, and it's easy to arouse the curiosity of those who look at that. We are speaking about a public that it's all the time watching TV series, that they love these kind of facts, but it's not easy to make transfer these contents to current sensibilities.
So I already have answered the question that I wanted to ask, but I will ask it anyway. Well, we are both museum men, so otherwise we would do another job. So, the question I'm asking you implies, I think I already know your answer. But do you think there is a future for materiality, for objects, for for museum being also the collection of objects or material objects, or do you think the new generation that are so used to dematerialize, to look up everything online, to have a digital object will be the future? And in the Museum of the Future, what do you think there will be the relations of the coexistence of materiality and immateriality?
Well, I think that, of course, I think that we in the museums, we have objects. We have not images, we have objects. That's very important. Tridimensional objects. That's something that, to me, it's very important. I wouldn't say that it's not just the new generations, that they are too familiarized with the screens and they think in terms of images. Even most of our colleagues, when they think about works of art, they think about them in terms of images, and they don't pay any attention to the materiality of these objects. And the difference between an image and an object is that an image it's something that it has been frozen in the time, while the object is something that is constantly telling you many things about the meaning, about the provenance, about how the object was made. So, since I was saying before how important is to arouse the curiosity of the viewer, I think that with an object is easier than with an image. For instance, we are doing an exhibition right now that it opened just 2 days ago. This is called The Reverse Side. What we have done is we have turned some of our paintings and we are inviting the visitors to, well, this is a book that I found very interesting, The Return of Curiosity, and I think it's a very convincing book. Are we in favor of the objects and the materiality of these objects, and how to deal with them, and how many stories could be weaved with these objects and appealing to new sensibilities. So it's a book that I strongly recommend it. And this is the exhibition that, let me see. Oh yeah. I think this is one, the reversos is the reverse side of the paintings. What we are doing is to consider that the paintings are not just images, are objects. So in order to do so, what we are inviting is to look to the other side of the paintings, and we are presenting these paintings as tridimensional objects. The work that is welcoming the visitors is the one in the upper right side, is the back of the Meninas. Doesn't mean that we have placed the Meninas facing the way. This is a work of art by itself by the Brazilian artist Big Muniz, who is working with the reverse side of some of the iconic masterpieces in the Western tradition. And then, well, many of the objects were displayed in a way that you could see both sides, while others that were just facing the walls. It has been shocking for our visitors, but as I said in the press conference, when I have the chance to see the front and the reverse part of the painting, when I can see the frame, when I can see the integrity of a work of art, it's like being in front of an archaeological strata, that every layer is giving you more and more information about the work of art. So that's why I think that we have to focus on the materiality of the works of art. And I think that once they know how to approach to the objects, but what's happening is that you have to teach, the younger generations how to deal with them, and even to university students who are not familiar with this. Many of the professors in the university, they do their history of art through reproductions. They don't care about the materiality of the works of art. So, but once that you became familiar with them, oh, it's so rewarding. You know, it's amazing. You know how many things you learn about them. So I think this is important. And then regarding the technology, till now, because now with the artificial intelligence, we are maybe at the very beginning of a new era. But until now, I don't see any incompatibility between technology and the works of art. I think that technology is a tool, and as every tool is not good or bad by definition, it all depends on the use that, how do you use the technology. And I cannot imagine running an important museum such as the Prado without the assistance of and the support of technology. Technology provides us with very successful tools for communicating what we do, for attracting new public. So I don't see right now an incompatibility between them. We are, since the very beginning, we took the technology very seriously. I think that we can say that we are one of the most technologically advanced museums in the world. We try to keep away from the galleries. We only have one screen in the galleries, and this is in the Bosque Gallery because it's so overcrowded. So we included this screen in order to invite, our visitors to pay some attention to the screen and not be all standing in front of the Garden of the Lights. But yeah, I think that I don't know how this is going to evolve, how it's going to change with the artificial intelligence. But till now, I think that it has been a very useful tool that is allowing museums to fulfill their mission.
And it doesn't take visitors away, even though many Cassandras are saying that new technologies will draw people away. Well, last year was the year where the museum worldwide was the most visited. We never experienced having so many visitors as we have last year. I don't know how it's going in Prado, but this year for us it's been incredibly. We're even going over the numbers of last year. So people actually, especially after the pandemic, where we were not able to see the objects, they really want to see the materiality. I do agree with you, and I think there is an important role that museums have also in education, also in parallel with university, is the fact that we pay attention to the materiality. I still belong to a generation of Egyptologists that when I was studying, when we were studying a coffin, we would only study the images and the Book of the Dead chapter. So we would have a list of coffins, and nobody would care what kind of wood and gypsum or whatever it was, but what kind of representation it was, and then you would do your typology, completely ignoring the materiality and the importance of the materiality and the information it can have. And I think that we should not be afraid to present also to new generation that we have objects which are made of materiality, and that is our important role. I still have at least 3 questions before I hope there are some questions from the audience. But one, I cannot avoid asking you how you're dealing in a museum like yours, where, I mean, the masterpieces is almost one after the other. You've already quoted the Meninas, to avoid that. I don't know whether you want to avoid. I just want to know, how do you deal with the fact that some of your work of art are so iconic that people actually come and go in front of that object, maybe ignoring the others. For me, it's always striking when I'm in Paris to see how many people are queuing in front of the Mona Lisa, and the Virgin of the Rocks is just ignored because it's not known. How is that a problem that you have as a museum director, of how you find a balance between these iconic pieces and the rest of the
Well,
collection?
this is one of the main challenges that we are facing right now. It's true that every year museums have more and more visitors, and now we are familiarized with these long lines outside the museums, with the rooms overcrowded. But this is something, I'm not going to say new, but this dates from the late 80s. I remember the Prado in the 70s and 80s was almost empty. It's funny because the Prado is next to the Parliament. And you can read the memoirs of many of the Spanish politicians that say that in the late 70s, early 80s, when they have had a very difficult session at the Parliament and they need for some quiet and silence, they went to the museum. My goodness, nobody can do that right now, no? But that's how it was then. And so, but since then, a few museums, not every museum, a few museums have become massive tourist destinations. Those that have these iconic works of art. There are amazing museums with excellent collections that are empty. But what attracts the massive numbers are these iconic works. There is some sort of vital passport that you cannot die without not seeing, the Mona Lisa or the Meninas. We are among those museums. But then when you visit these museums, you realize that within these museums, you always find the same situation. There are a few galleries that are overcrowded, and most of the museum is empty. So that's why I think that it's quite difficult to find a proper solution for this problem. Because, okay, let's say that I'm going to limit the access to the museum to 15,000 per day. Doesn't matter. The 15,000 are going to go straight to the Bosque Garden of Early Delights and to the Meninas, while several galleries will remain empty. So it's not easy to do that. And I remember a former director of the Louvre telling me, what we should do is to take the Meninas to the Mona Lisa to a corner of the museum.
Just to reverse the Menina.
In an empty space, and and all the tourists would go there, and we could enjoy the rest of the museum for ourselves. That's true, but this is quite difficult to change. And then it's true, limited numbers or but. Once you pass through the gates of the museum, you can do whatever you want. You can visit every gallery and look at every painting. I don't know anybody who does that, but you can just focus on one painting, or you cannot visit any gallery at all. You go straight to the cafeteria, take a coffee, and leave the museum. So it's quite difficult to deal with this subject, and frankly, I don't know what to do. We this year we will close the year with around 3.5 million visitors. That's, I think, the maximum that we can accommodate. And the challenge is how to make compatible these growing numbers with the quality of the visit. We took a decision years ago, my predecessor took this decision, that it was very polemic, is that you cannot take pictures of the Prado. You can download the whole collection for free from the web page, and with a higher resolution and higher quality than the pictures that you can take with your cell phone, but you cannot take pictures in the galleries. When I was appointed director almost 7 years ago, every single week I got a complaint about this policy, saying you are a troglodyte, we are living in the 21st century, you cannot be against the technological process. I have to say that in the last 2 years, I've not got any complaint. I'm getting, many, congratulations, visitors telling me, the difference between visiting a museum, one of these overcrowded museums where you can take or you cannot take pictures. And I have to say that some colleagues have asked me about this, And at least I know one museum that right now has forbidden taking pictures, following the example of the Prado. It's not, but it helps, Frankly, when you are, imagine being in front of the Mona Lisa with nobody taking pictures. Well, you could think that you were in heaven. But that's little, steps, but helps.
I know that you told me that in Spain, but sometimes also in Italy, there is always a kind of dialectic dialogue between a central national museum collecting art coming from the whole country and communities from which those original objects come that they want to have them back. There are archaeological museums, especially in the southern part of the countries, that have to deal with that all the time. The Museo Nazionale di Reggio Calabria, for instance, is one of them, where the objects are called back, and even then, there are symbolic objects of that museum that whenever anybody says, for instance, the famous bronze of Riace, can they go to an exhibition in a national museum in Rome? Well, the answer is no, because the population would come up in a revolution, more or less, because they're seen as truly identity. Not only, they're also seen as the reason of an economic resource for the communities. Do you deal with the same kind of problem, be a central national museum and being looked upon from communities or smaller museums in the country?
Absolutely. I'm not an expert about the Italian situation, but I would say that in terms of culture, Italy is a more decentralized country than Spain.
It's very decentralized because it has to do with the fact that we were unified only in 1860, and the first law on conservation, central law, was only at the beginning of the 20th century, because people didn't want to force from Rome what the previous independent states were.
I think that there is not by chance that the two more decentralized, cultural decentralized countries in Europe are Germany and Italy. Both, the unification, it's from the 19th century. So while in Spain it's not the case, and there is a growing unrest about this issue, and that it affects particularly the national museums. There are many who are asking mostly the Prado, to open branches throughout the country. And in the case of the National Archaeological Museum, they are just asking for dismantling it, closing, and sending back all the pieces to the regions of origin. There is a growing pressure about it. However, the Prado is one of the very few national museums in Europe that is a true national museum from a geographical point of view. 3,000 of our paintings are outside Madrid. They are, and they have been, in permanent deposits in museums and institutions throughout Spain since the late 19th century. But it's true that this was very badly done. These works of art were sent away from Madrid because the museum didn't have enough space for them, and they were sent to different locations without any criteria and without asking the opinion of the receiving institutions. Even more, they thought that this was going to last just a few years. So in order to avoid that the receiving communities could develop some attachment to the works, what they did in a country like Spain with a very strong regional feeling is, let's do this. We are sending the works by the Catalan artists to Andalusia. Those from Andalusian artists to the Basque Country. Those from the Basque Country to the Canary Islands. The Canaries, so, they achieve their goal. Nobody knows in Spain that in most of our cities there are paintings from the Prado. As a result of that, since I was appointed director, every month or so I meet a mayor or a governor who is asking me to open a branch of the Prado, ignoring that in their cities are works by the Prado. So we have decided that we have to do something, So we discussed this issue. We decided that we were not going to open branches for two reasons. First, because, at the end, politicians, when they are asking for branches of the Prado, they don't care. They don't care about the cultural issues. They are desperately looking for tourists. So, in order to do that, you have to move through masterpieces from the Prado to these new branches. What it would distort the idea that we have of the museum. Besides that, even doing so, we could, in the best possible scenario, we could open 1, 2 more branches. In Spain, there are 18 regions, 50 provinces. Well, you can imagine the feeling of grievance of those who didn't get. So we think that this idea of permanent deposits is right, but doing properly. This time what you have to do is to talk with the receiving institutions. So what we have done is first, we have asked all those institutions, the works that you have, do you want to keep them, or do you want to return these works to? These are the 10% of our collections are in permanent deposit outside the Prado. So we have designed this logo. It's blurred, but it's the Prado extended. And this is this new policy. So we are asking these institutions, do you want to keep our paintings? If so, you keep them. If you are not interested on them, please, send the paintings back to Madrid. Because we soon realized that, you could detect the same pattern in everywhere. They keep the works by the local artists, and they didn't show any interest in those works from artists from other regions. But at the end, it was not a matter of quality, it was a matter of identity. What didn't interest in Seville could be of interest in Barcelona because they were Catalan painters. So we began to move, hundreds of paintings from one place to the other. And, it is working. Still, we have to work a lot in the future, but at least, we have these institutions that are happy with the paintings they have, that they fit in their, museographies, that we are asking them to include this logo, the extended Prado, and to display them in the galleries. But besides this policy of the permanent deposits, we have decided that we have to do something else. So what we are doing is we have started a program that, workers from these smaller museums could come to the Prado in order to update their knowledge in every aspect of the life of a museum. And then we are helping them, in developing, educational programs, plus the lending of, the occasional lending of masterpieces. During our bicentennial, probably to me, the most successful of the many activities that we did was touring Spain. We took a masterpiece to every region, to every of the 18 regions. We chose small cities
cities where, they have never had the chance to enjoy a work by one of the genius of the Western tradition. And it was a huge success. It had a big impact. Imagine, I remember taking a painting by Titian to Teruel. This is a tiny city of 30,000 population, and in just 1 month, 15,000 of them visited the museum and enjoyed this painting. Next year we are going to do the second edition of this tour in the Prado. So the idea is to redesign this policy of deposits, taking into consideration the needs, the demands of the receiving institutions, plus this educational or this professional program that inviting professionals from other museums to come to the Prado, and then this occasional loan of masterpieces that could reinforce these small museums throughout the country.
Well, thank you. I have just a last question. How was the bicentennial? If you can say in a few words what worked and what didn't work, so that you can give us some tips.
It worked because first, it worked not necessarily because we got big support from the government. We got €0 for celebrating the bicentennial of the museum, but even so, we were able to have a very ambitious program. And for us, it was very important when I was at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned this triple dimension of the Prado, international, national, local. For us, the local one, the national one was the most important. So we decided that this had to be celebrated throughout the country. I think that probably the main asset of the Prado, and what makes it quite different from many other major museums, it's the identification of the museum with the country, with the nation. Spain is the Prado is not it's a national museum, but it's not a museum of the nation. It's not an historic museum. It doesn't pretend to tell the history of Spain. But it's true that for many Spaniards, the Prado encapsulates the best of the nation. It has been in this way for many, many years. And for us to renew this idea, this, let's say, alliance between the Prado and the Spaniards, that was the main goal of our bicentennials. And I think that we achieved our goal. And this is, to me, the main challenge in the coming future. Because, Spain, like Italy, are countries that are changing a lot from a demographic point of view. This when I was a child, there were not blacks living in Spain, the basketball players, I was born under the Franco regime. Every Spaniard had to be Catholic. You couldn't be a Spaniard not being Catholic. So these things have changed. But that means that if the society has changed, the museum has to change too. If you want to keep this strong, very close tie between the museum and the Spanish society, the museum has to evolve at least as much as the nation does. And this is our main challenge for the future.
Well, thank you, Miguel. You gave a lecture where like unrobber us from the beginning, and we started in fostering diversity and opening to community, and we ended up for that. So I really want to thank you for coming here, but before releasing you, I want to ask, are there questions, curiosity that you want to ask the director of the Prado? Anche in italiano, perché ci sono domande, curiosità, prego.
Sì, capisco bene l'italiano.
Allora, due temi che mi interessavano sono già stati abbastanza discussi, quindi il rapporto con la comunità locale e la gestione dei flussi del pubblico, visto che io vengo da Venezia, quindi il sovraffollamento turistico è abbastanza importante. Un punto invece che quindi non è stato parlato è il rapporto tra il museo e la ricerca, quindi che ruolo ha per il Museo del Prado la ricerca?
Io sono convinto che un museo senza ricercatori, senza ricerca è un museo morto. Credo che il futuro dei musei è, non so cosa pensi tu, però io non so, viaggio moltissimo e in ogni città trovo la stessa architettura, la stessa cucina, no? In tutti i posti si può mangiare lo stesso. I musei tutti sembrano uguali. Io credo che il futuro è per i musei che hanno una forte personalità. Questa personalità è il risultato della collezione e del modo come si lavora sulla collezione. E se tu hai i più capaci, se tu hai quelli che sono bravi ricercatori, che possono raccontare la collezione in modi diversi, per pubblico diverso, questo è molto importante. Per noi è molto importante e dirò che appena 5 anni fa, prima della Covid, si è aperto il centro di ricerca del Prado. Questo è un edificio vicino all'edificio principale, il cosiddetto Casson del Buen Retiro, e intorno all'archivio e alla biblioteca ci sono gli uffici dei curatori, ma anche c'è questo centro di ricerca che ha un direttore, che è un professore ordinario dell'università, che è full time al museo. Abbiamo borsisti, da quelli che cominciano a fare la sua tesi dottorale fino a quelli che sono grandi nomi, no? della storia dell'arte, tutti lavorando insieme. Abbiamo moltissimi progetti, moltissimi convegni e questo per noi è importante perché in certo modo il futuro del museo è là. Sono loro che devono sviluppare le idee per il futuro del museo, se no devi copiare quello che fanno gli altri. Noi siamo al Prado, sono 459 permanenti e 150 eventuali. Per la ricerca per curatori tra full curators, assistant curators sono come 20. Dobbiamo avere più, ma ti dirò che per me il problema più grande è trovare i giovani che sono davvero interessati in la pittura antica. Tutti vogliono fare arte contemporanea e ti dirò che in Spagna è quasi impossibile trovare qualcuno e se la situazione segue così, ti dirò che in 10 anni la metà saranno italiani.
Noi siamo tornati ad essere
tutti i nostri borsisti in questo momento sono italiani.
Vado in italiano. Io volevo riagganciarmi a quello che ha detto prima a proposito del fatto che la maggior parte dei visitatori si ferma a visitare Las Meninas ma alla fine questo è dovuto al fatto che è vero ci sono più visitatori, ma sono visitatori che sono tra virgolette un po' meno acculturati e quindi conoscono le cose dal punto di vista popolare, cioè dalla cultura pop proprio, perché Las Meninas, come il bacio di Snow, come la Mona Lisa, sono diventate delle icone pop grazie a qualcun altro. Perché non potrebbe essere venuto il momento adesso dei musei di creare le vostre icone pop? Perché non sfruttare magari la possibilità dei media per dire ok, adesso il Prado lancia come icona pop che sarà magari riconosciuta come tale fra 10 anni, a forza di martellamenti su Instagram, sul coso, televisioni, ovunque, farà sì che quando, che so, fra 10 anni chi verrà al Prado conoscerà non solo Las Meninas, ma conoscerà anche qualcos'altro che avete deciso di diventare la nuova icona pop del Prado. Ma questo vale per il Prado, ma come vale per qualsiasi altro museo?
Cerchiamo di farlo, di ampliare l'interesse, no? per altri pittori, altri artisti, altri dipinti nella collezione, ma non è facile, perché il problema con questi visitatori che visitano una volta il museo nella sua vita, questo, è che lo visitano velocemente, perché la visita media è come 1 ora e mezza, 90 minuti per vedere il dipinto, dopo si vanno al Thyssen o al Reina Sofia e 90 minuti non hanno un interesse così grande solo per 3-4 dipinti. Noi lo facciamo così e abbiamo un'attività straordinaria nelle reti sociali, l'Instagram, però ogni tanto sì, io posso dire che ci sono alcuni dipinti che negli ultimi anni hanno diventato, se non icona, almeno dipinti popolari che non lo erano 15 anni prima, no? Però non è facile perché il problema è che i visitanti vogliono vedere quello che hanno già in mente, no? È molto difficile di convincere a loro che ci sono anche, no? di altri dipinti che meritano una visita, una riflessione, no? Non è facile, no?
Bene, allora, no, c'è un'altra domanda, sì. Do io il microfono?
E in riferimento all'amico giapponese che non comprendeva come noi, diciamo, una mostra, mi è capitato di andare al museo con un mio amico egiziano. Eravamo, mi sembra, al Castello Sforzesco di Milano, quindi mostre di arte cattolica, molti quadri religiosi. E dopo diverse sale il mio amico mi chiede: ma senti, perché in tutti questi quadri c'è un piccione? E io non capisco qual è il piccione. Il piccione è la colomba che porta il rametto d'olivo. Io dico: no, in che senso? Aspetta, qual è il piccione? E quindi mi chiedevo, io non avrei mai previsto che il piccione, appunto, per qualcun altro che non era abituato a vederlo fin da bambino, non aveva alcun senso, perché per me ovviamente, avendolo sempre visto, aveva senso. Quindi mi chiedo anche all'interno di un museo, nello specifico un museo nazionale, ma anche un museo in generale, quanto è importante che chi ci lavora abbia anche, insomma, una diversità di appartenenza culturale ma anche geografica. Quanto è importante avere collaboratori che non la pensano in Spagna, non la pensano come gli spagnoli, diciamo, comunque sono in grado di vedere cosa non è facilmente comprensibile nelle mostre del museo.
Sì, questo è importante e abbiamo avuto non dirò una rivoluzione, ma è vero che ha avuto un piccolo cambiamento negli ultimi anni. Prima dal 2003 era impossibile, tutti dovevano essere spagnoli, adesso abbiamo una giapponesa, abbiamo 2 tedeschi, abbiamo alcuni italiani, abbiamo americani, abbiamo argentini, sì, ci sono alcuni e sì, certamente è importante, perché spesso loro hanno una visione della nostra collezione che è diversa, no? E si impara molto da loro, sì, questo è importante.
E l'Italia in questo ha ancora molto da fare sulla diversity policy. Noi siamo fortunati, abbiamo per fortuna un collega canadese, abbiamo 2 colleghi tedeschi, perché noi siamo una fondazione privata e quindi possiamo assumere delle persone e poi chiedere loro, o è il museo che si fa carico, che insegna loro l'italiano. Nei musei dello Stato in Italia si entra per concorso facendo 2 esami scritti e un esame orale, la conoscenza della lingua italiana e la formazione italiana. Peraltro questo penalizza tantissimo anche coloro che non si occupano, nel caso dell'archeologia, di archeologia classica, perché per entrare in un museo, nel sistema dello Stato italiano, uno comunque deve sostenere un esame in archeologia classica, poi se è egittologo quello va bene, però in realtà noi abbiamo collezioni egittologiche, questo è un problema, il problema del reclutamento, è un problema che l'Italia si sta ponendo moltissimo.
La situazione in Spagna è la stessa, no? Però il Prado ha un statuto speciale e ha un'autonomia di gestione che non l'hanno gli altri musei. Questa è la ragione per la quale noi abbiamo un giapponese, tutti gli altri musei sono tutti spagnoli, perché si accede per concorso e devono dimostrare la conoscenza della lingua spagnola.
Bene, a me non resta che ringraziare Miguel Falomir per averci fatto questo magnifico regalo, essere venuto da voi, questa ora e mezza di conversazione con te per noi è volata, grazie davvero. E una cosa che non ti ho detto all'inizio, che però lo dico alla fine, questi dialoghi che facciamo con i direttori delle più grandi istituzioni avranno poi una forma scritta, ti chiederemo poi quindi ad un certo punto di raccogliere le idee e per il 25, quindi dopo il bicentenario, apparirà un volume in cui i 10 grandi direttori delle istituzioni europee faranno vedere la loro visione di un museo, che comunque è una bella cosa, che anno 2024, qual è la visione dei musei di coloro che sono responsabili delle più grandi istituzioni.
Grazie, tante grazie per la vostra attenzione.
Grazie.